Yeah, so last week was interesting. I finally contracted coronavirus, which I'm assuming is the Omicron variant because I wasn't very sick. Of course, I've been vaccinated and boosted, so I had a few layers of protection. But the best way I'm normally tired. I just knew the timing was too off. There were people I was around that had the virus. So basically it was like the dry flu for 2 or 3 days, where I was just exhausted. I couldn't even sit in a fucking chair. So that was fun. But I did read an article around the same time that was saying there was 5 million people in the country out of work, which I'm guessing that's why China is locking people inside of boxes. They're not playing games with it, so naturally. And I basically I've been reading, I inadvertently I bought, I want to say 3 or 4 different books on fascism, one of which was bullshit. I bought a book by Wilhelm Reich about fascism, and it ended up being a bunch of pseudoscience and half Freudian nonsense, talking about orgone energy and all this, concepts that have no business in a political science book. So I'm not going to read it, at that point. Unfortunately, as I'm fleshing out my book collection, there are a few like that. I did get Stanley G. Payne's History of Fascism, which is much more comprehensive. Umberto Eco's How to Spot a Fascist, which is the classic essay called Urfascism, which is about, about fascism throughout all cultures, I guess, is the best way to describe it. It's got 10 or 15 points where you would be able to identify fascist. Because it is my firm belief that the United States is going to go, it's already in that direction. We're already in the Weimar Germany phase where political violence is very common. And there's a very stupid idea that I hear people talking about, which is, or a very stupid idea I hear people talk about, which is people that are incredibly left-wing, which are rare, will sit there and talk about how, the communists will beat the fascists. Well, no, because in most historical examples, especially in democracies, what ends up happening is if you get a polarization like that, like in Weimar Germany, the biggest parties were the Communist Party, the SPD, and then the rightist parties, of which the Nazis were one. So you ended up not having the Weimar democracy saved. You ended up basically scaring the middle class, which the middle class actually is in favor of fascism in a lot of instances, okay? And that's another thing people don't want to talk about. You look at Mussolini's black shirts. First of all, the Fascist Party membership right after the March on Rome never got above 800,000. But if you looked at the membership rolls, half, more than half, so a good majority were middle-class people. So it wasn't like this reactionary movement where the elites imposed it. People wanted it. And that's actually the only good thing that Wilhelm Reich says in his book about fascism, is that fascism represents the ordinary man's character that in normal civil society is repressed. So we revert to fascism because it's kind of a state of nature in terms of power for power's sake. And that, of course, that's the through line anytime you're going to declare what a fascist movement is ultimately is power for power's sake, because people have these idiotic debates even to this day about National Socialism being left-wing because it has socialism in the title, or it being right-wing, neither of which are really true, because if you look at fascist movements, they will use left-wing positions if it gets them into power and enables them to do what they want to do, which is to take over, right? So that's the whole point. So Mussolini would try left-wing policies, and they'd fail, and he'd just change on a whim. What are you talking about? There was no left-wing policy, kind of like we've always been at war with Eurasia, that kind of thing. Which not only was Orwell anti-Stalinist, he was anti-fascist. And in fact, if you look at 1940 and 1984, it's written as if the Japanese won the Pacific War, as if the Soviets took over Eurasia, obviously, and as if there was a communist revolution in Oceania, which was America, Australia, and Britain, roughly. So, and he's coming from the perspective of a person that fought or was in favor of the Republican cause in the Spanish Civil War, which, if you want to look at a complex situation in terms of alliances and who's on whose side, look at the various blocks in the Spanish Civil War, where you've got the left-wing movements that are the syndicalists working with the roughly left-wing Republic, and then you got Catholic monarchists working with Franco, and another general who ends up getting shot by the Republic. So, yeah, I mean, it is complicated, but I think the United States is roughly headed in that direction. I've seen people completely take objectivity's dead. We're in a post-truth era. We've gotten past the point to where people are going to say, don't believe it because it's on the internet. Actually, people are doing the exact opposite now. They're believing everything they fucking read on the internet over the mainstream media because they perceive that the mainstream media's slight bias, one in the left direction, equates to some kind of Pravda-esque mutilation of the truth, which isn't actually happening. So they've taken that position. And so now we have hyper-partisan sources, and we have algorithms which are selecting for hyper-partisan positions. And so what ends up happening is you get these very extreme figures that end up getting all of the attention, and people are getting radicalized to the point to where they're in favor of violent action. Which is why January 6th is alternatively being hailed as the greatest thing ever, or as some kind of Antifa plot by the FBI, some kind of conspiracy theory nonsense. Which, make no mistake, another tenet of fascism is, of course, you attack the press, which the Republicans have been doing for at least like 30 or 40 fucking years. So this is just the chickens coming home to roost. Attack the press. You have your own propagandists. You got your Rush Limbaughs and your Michael Savage and your Alex Jones and all those people, right, who are just spouting propaganda. You attack the press. You destroy the notion of objectivity. And there's a lot of fringe science in fascism too. I mean, for instance, one of the things that handicapped the Germans was the notion of Jewish science, which is what they called relativity. So you had a lot of breakthroughs in physics which were denied. Now you're seeing the same denial of science in the anti-vax movement, which has left and right-wing proponents, right? We've all run into the unbathed hippie that doesn't believe in laundry detergent and also doesn't believe in vaccines. Those people are anti-vaxxers too. It's not just Trump people. So you're seeing that as a movement. And January 6th reminds me of the beer hall push. It's exactly analogous. And the lack of action against the people that carried it out. I mean, the broad strokes, you're going to see people get away. The movements that did it, the militias and Proud Boys and all this, which are armed right-wing militias that are paramilitary groups just like the brown shirts. Okay, it's an exact analogy. They're not going to get punished. They're going to come back. And actually, because Biden is doing such a poor job, like overall, he got handed a shit show, but he's not doing much to improve it. He's not going to get reelected. And so I know what's going to end up happening, and a lot of people are lying to themselves. I see this online. Trump is going to get reelected. He's probably going to win on his own. He's not going to have to cheat, but he's setting up a system where he's setting up a situation where it is possible to do that. You know, and those types of machinations are possible if you end up controlling all the state houses and all the offices that actually count the votes on the state level. You can actually just flip the electors. But I don't even think that's going to be necessary. I think Biden is going to get completely crushed in 2024. Trump is going to come in, and I don't know what the Trumpist American fascism is going to look like exactly. We've got some inclinations from the last administration, but it's not a good outcome for the United States. It's a dark timeline we're on. You know, you want to see why nostalgia is so great for people, why people are so nostalgic for old movies, and it's because I think back in like the 1990s, it was like the economy was great. We didn't want to kill each other. We did actually. There was Tim McVeigh and stuff, but Tim McVeigh was an outlier. He wasn't mainstream Republican. Now Tim McVeigh would be part and parcel of the Republican Party. You know, and I've heard political scientists talk about the reasons the Republicans are doing this. I don't know if this is true, but that the Republican Party is so afraid that it's demographically losing in terms of new voters because of the changing demographic makeup of the United States, that they've made a deal with the devil, and they're riding the wave so they can just seize power and hold on to it, which is analogous to, you know, Pinochet in Chile and some of these other authoritarian movements. But we already have an unresponsive political system, so it's not going to take much. And if you think that your neighbors wouldn't cheer you being put in a camp, I mean, you're not. There absolutely are people that would love that, you know, one way or the other. So I don't know. I don't see a civil war happening though either, because the only thing that would ignite a civil war in the United States on that level would be something like gun confiscation. I think that liberals lie to themselves about gun confiscation. Let's say, because a lot of Republicans will say, oh yeah, I'll die for my AR-15 or whatever. Okay. Whatever, it's your life. You want to die for your whatever. Okay. Good. Awesome. Most of those people are full of shit. Most people that talk are just talking. But if you take 1% of that, and you say 1% of those people that have that belief system are going to carry it out, you have a huge number of people who would be willing to take up arms against the government. Notwithstanding the Buglu boys and any disaffected people that might be out there wanting to just destroy the federal government for the sake of destroying it. Because there is a nihilistic aspect of terrorism. If you study the nihilist movement in Russia, you'll understand there's a facet of that in the United States where it's just they want to destroy. Because most people that are thinking of overthrowing the state or seceding from the federal government or overthrowing the federal government, they're thinking only in terms of the problems of the system we have now, not understanding that if you split the United States up or you cause a civil war, whatever the case may be, or you irrevocably change the system to a more authoritarian direction, you know, causing way more problems than you actually solve. And one of the realignments I've seen in terms of the parties, and this is kind of a general statement, it seems like the Democrats are the conservatives now. The Democrats and the liberals are the ones that want to maintain some aspect of civil society, whereas you have people like Mike Flynn that want a theocracy. They want to ban all the other religions, apparently. According to him, we should just be a Christian nation and just, you know, fuck anybody that's not a Bible thumper, I guess. And they want to overthrow key aspects of the country. I mean, you got a right-wing attempt, a Republican attempt to influence Congress to vote a certain way and not certify the election results. It was a coup attempt, right? So that's an inherently revolutionary action coming from the Republican Party. So that's not very conservative. Conservatives don't do that. So it does, and yeah, and the Republican Party is now all about isolationism to the point of dismantling American power, which is one of the reasons why Afghanistan went so badly. was the deal that Trump cut with the Taliban. It was a bad deal. Biden is stupid for abiding by it, by the way. But it's a wild. I mean, we're on track to be dethroned as a global power by the Chinese. We're not on track for hyperinflation. People who believe that are stupid. That's not macroeconomically true. It's not inevitable either. That's a libertarian fantasy. But because people misunderstand the CPI. The CPI isn't month to month. The CPI from January is counting just from last January, right? It's not month to month. So if you're a 5% increase, it's a yearly thing. It's not month to month. I don't know what it is if you track it month to month. It's still bad, but you're not talking about the currency being inflated to the point of being worthless. Which, I mean, if people talk about cryptocurrency or gold and silver, that's how you know they don't know anything about finance. They don't know anything about macroeconomics. Do not ever take... I mean, if you listen to conservative radio, you'll get these gold ads constantly, and I know plenty of Republicans that understand, understand the market and believe in the market and make money in the market. Because the stock market's real, right? If you run the numbers, you're basically guaranteed to always make money on the long term, right? So, I mean, that's my soapbox thing for people. But yeah, it's a bizarre timeline we're on. But I think that the pandemic is about to wrap up finally.